The suitcase hit the front lawn with a heavy thud that echoed across the quiet suburban street, cutting through the stillness like a warning bell. Alicia Grant stood motionless on the sidewalk, her nurse badge still clipped to her scrubs after a long night shift. She watched as her husband, Brandon Hale, dragged the second suitcase down the steps with loud, angry stomps. His voice rose sharply, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "You're done here," he announced, as if performing for an audience he had personally invited. Curtains rustled, doors cracked open, phones lifted. Mrs. Willis from across the street stared openly from her window, while Mr. Keller angled his phone to capture every detail. Alicia didn't shed a tear. She didn't scream, beg, or plead. She simply stared at Brandon, the man she once trusted without hesitation, now throwing her life into the yard like it meant nothing. And then she saw the woman standing in the bedroom window behind him. Tessa Monroe, Brandon's co-worker. A woman Alicia had once welcomed into her home, offered dinner, shared stories with. Now Tessa stood wrapped in Alicia's favorite blue robe, sipping coffee from the mug that read "World's Best Daughter." Murking, claiming victory. That small nod exchanged between the two was all Alicia needed to know. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned, designed, delivered for maximum humiliation. And yet she remained steady. Because no one, not Brandon, not Tessa, not any neighbor watching, knew that Alicia Grant was not as alone as they thought. Her mother, Ruth Grant, had predicted this exact betrayal long before her death. And Alicia had been warned. When the day comes, don't panic. Just make the call. She reached slowly into her bag and did exactly that. Alicia sat on her suitcase with a calm that shocked the neighborhood more than the spectacle itself. Inside, her pulse thundered, but on the outside, her expression remained unerringly steady. Brandon had retreated inside, laughing with Tessa as if he had finally claimed triumph over her. He believed he had taken everything from her. Her home, her dignity, her peace. But he had no idea that Ruth Grant, even in the final months of her life, had been 10 steps ahead of him. Mrs. Willis hurried across the lawn with a folding chair and a bottle of water, whispering, "You sit right here, dear. Let that man dig his own grave." Alicia nodded softly, her voice barely audible. "He already has." A strange hush washed over the street. The air itself felt heavier, thick with anticipation. When exactly 19 minutes passed, a silver sedan pulled to the curb. A thin man stepped out wearing a worn gray suit and carrying a scuffed briefcase that looked older than him. His presence was quiet yet commanding, immediately drawing the neighborhood's attention. He walked directly toward Alicia and extended his hand. "Mrs. Grant," he said clearly. "I'm Stephen Ward, your mother's attorney." The neighbors leaned in, sensing a shift. Alicia rose slowly, her expression unchanging. She gestured toward the house. "He's inside." Stephen nodded once. "Then let's give Mr. Hale the news." Stephen walked to the front door and rang the bell 3 times. Hard, deliberate, final. The sound sliced through the air like a judge calling court into session. Heavy footsteps approached, and the door jerked open. Brandon appeared, red-faced and seething. "Who the hell are you?" he snapped. "You can't just show up here." Stephen didn't flinch. Instead, he raised the thick envelope he carried and spoke loudly enough for the entire street to hear. "Actually, Mr. Hale, you're the one trespassing. I'm here on behalf of the legal owner of this property, your wife, Alicia Grant." A wave of murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Mrs. Green nearly dropped her phone. Brandon blinked, his anger faltering. "What are you talking about? My name's on the deed." Stephen's tone remained calm. "Your name was removed from the deed 18 months ago. Your late mother-in-law, Mrs. Ruth Grant, initiated the reconveyance before her passing. This home has been owned solely by her daughter since March of last year. You have no legal right to occupy it." The color drained from Brandon's face. His mouth opened and closed like he couldn't find air. Behind him, Tessa Monroe stepped into view, suddenly pale, her smirk gone. Brandon stammered, Ruth wouldn't do that, she loved me. Stephen's expression hardened. She loved her daughter more. She also knew about the affair, the lies, and the forged documents. Gasps erupted. Someone whispered, "Forged." Stephen nodded firmly. 2 fraudulent loan applications using this property as collateral. Your mother-in-law documented everything. Brandon froze. Tessa's eyes widened. And the truth began to unravel. Stephen pulled a second folder from his briefcase, each motion slow and deliberate, ensuring every neighbor witnessed Brandon's collapse. Your mother-in-law hired a private investigator, Stephen continued. She recorded everything: photographs, timestamps, hotel receipts. He flipped open a page. Including your visit to the downtown Marriott with Miss Monroe on March 3, 2 years ago. The same night Mrs. Grant fell and was taken to the hospital alone. The street fell into a suffocating silence. Even the birds seemed to stop. Brandon's shoulders sagged under the weight of the truth. She knew, he whispered. All of it, Stephen confirmed. Alicia stepped forward then, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through him. You thought you were taking everything, she said. But the only thing you ever really owned was your guilt. Tessa clutched the doorframe, her voice trembling for the first time. What investigator? He's lying. Stephen didn't look at her. Actually, Miss Monroe, your name is also listed in the report. Your visits, your messages, even your attempt to access Alicia's private bank account while she was caring for her dying mother. Tessa's mouth dropped open, her face drained of color. You can't be serious. Stephen slipped a restraining order into Brandon's shaking hands. You are to remove only your personal items. Any attempt to destroy or take property belonging to Mrs. Grant will result in immediate arrest. The crowd leaned closer. The fall of Brandon Hale had only just begun. Alicia watched Brandon's unraveling with a quiet strength that left even her neighbors in awe. His hands trembled violently as he read the restraining order. Tessa whispered, "Loans? You never told me about any loans." Brandon glared at her, but Stephen interjected sharply. It concerns you, Miss Monroe. Those fraudulent loans total more than $120,000. That qualifies as grand larceny. Tessa staggered backward. Brandon's voice cracked. I needed the money. My business was collapsing. I planned to pay it back. Stephen shook his head. You forged your wife's signature while she worked double shifts to care for her dying mother. You planned nothing but theft. Alicia folded her arms, her eyes glistening but firm. Mom knew, she whispered. She changed everything to protect me. Stephen nodded. Ruth Grant recorded every detail. She ensured her daughter would never lose a single brick of this home. Brandon's knees nearly buckled. She set me up, he muttered. No, Stephen replied. She finally saw you for who you were. Tessa wrapped her robe tighter around herself, shame burning her skin. The neighbors whispered, watching years of deception collapse in minutes. Alicia inhaled slowly, hearing her mother's voice echo inside her. You're stronger than you think. Brandon took a step toward Alicia, pleading now. Please, we can fix this. She shook her head calmly. You already did this to yourself. And there's nothing left to fix. When Brandon tried to step toward Alicia again, Stephen lifted one steady hand, stopping him mid-stride. Don't, the attorney warned. You're already standing on private property that no longer belongs to you. One more step and you'll be trespassing. Brandon froze, his face contorting as anger collapsed into pure, visible defeat. Stephen reached into his briefcase once more. There's something else, he added, his tone shifting to something almost solemn. He handed Alicia a cream-colored envelope, her mother's handwriting curling beautifully across the front. Alicia's breath caught. She wanted you to have this today, Stephen explained. She predicted this exact moment, the locks being changed, your husband trying to turn you out, even the neighborhood watching. The already silent crowd seemed to lean in closer. Alicia's hands trembled as she held the envelope, recognizing the familiar loops of her mother's pen. She planned this far ahead, she whispered. Stephen's expression softened. Ruth Grant was a remarkable woman. She set up alerts with the county office. The moment anything shifted with the property, I was notified. The weight of the envelope felt heavier than paper. Heavier even than betrayal. It was her mother's last protection, delivered at the exact moment Alicia needed it most. She nodded once, steadying herself. I want to read it inside, she murmured. Stephen smiled gently. It's your home, Mrs. Grant. You may do whatever you wish. Alicia walked past Brandon without a word. The man who had thrown her belongings outside now stepped aside like a scolded child, unable to meet her eyes. The front door, slammed against her minutes earlier, opened quietly this time, as if acknowledging its true owner. Inside, the house felt both familiar and foreign. Her favorite vanilla coffee candle still lingered in the air, but beneath it was the sour, unmistakable scent of betrayal. Wine glasses on the table, a woman's purse on the couch, traces of someone else's presence layered over the remnants of her mother's final days. Alicia paused in the living room, remembering where her mother's hospital bed once stood. The blanket Ruth had loved was gone, replaced by Tessa's careless clutter. Alicia whispered, "You protected me, Mom. Even now." She made her way to the kitchen table, the place where she and Ruth once shared late-night talks over tea. With trembling hands, Alicia opened the envelope. The first line of the letter brought immediate tears. "My dearest Alicia, if you're reading this, I was right about Brandon." Her mother's handwriting was slightly shaky but still strong. Every stroke carried love, sacrifice, and truth. Alicia pressed a hand to her mouth as she read on. Ruth's letter revealed sacrifices Alicia had never known. While Alicia worked exhausting double shifts, Ruth had spent her final months gathering evidence instead of resting. She had refused certain treatments, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't want her daughter buried in debt. "I couldn't save myself," the letter read, "but I could save you." Alicia wiped her tears as the words blurred. Ruth explained how she uncovered the affair, the forged signatures, the fraudulent loans, every detail Brandon had tried to hide. She wrote of late nights reviewing documents, calling investigators, meeting with lawyers, all while fighting pain no one knew she endured. "This house belongs to the women in our family," Ruth wrote. "And I made sure you would never lose it." The final paragraph shattered Alicia completely. "Use the money enclosed to help others like you. Women who gave too much to men who gave too little." Inside the envelope was a check for $40,000, dated a week before Ruth's passing. Alicia let out a soft sob, a mixture of grief, gratitude, and rebirth. As she sat stunned, she heard footsteps behind her. Stephen stepped into the kitchen doorway, his voice gentle. "I'll leave you to your thoughts. But before I go, there's one more thing." Stephen closed his briefcase slowly, his expression shifting from compassion back to caution. "The woman, Tessa Monroe," he said. "She isn't who she says she is." Alicia blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Stephen stepped closer. "Her real name is Tessa Morris. She's still legally married. She has a record of property-related schemes in multiple states. She targets men with assets." Alicia's stomach tightened. "You're saying she targeted Brandon?" "Precisely," Stephen replied. "And her husband is on his way here right now." Before Alicia could respond, the distant rumble of a truck engine filled the street. Through the kitchen window, she saw a tall man step out, broad-shouldered, exhausted, and determined. Two small children sat waiting in the truck's back seat, staring out with wide, confused eyes. The man called out loudly, "Tessa, we need to talk." The neighbors outside stirred again, whispers rising. Alicia hurried to the doorway in time to see Brandon step outside, bewildered. "Who is that?" he demanded. The color drained from Tessa's face as she whispered, "That's my husband." Anthony Morris walked up the driveway clutching a stack of papers. "Anthony Morris," he introduced flatly. "We've been married 12 years. I've been trying to serve you divorce and custody papers for 8 months. Gasps rippled across the lawn as the truth detonated more violently than anything that had come before it. Brandon stared at Tessa as if seeing her for the first time. You're married. His voice cracked with disbelief. She tried to speak. Brandon, it's not what you think. But Anthony cut her off sharply. It's exactly what he thinks. You have done this before. Ohio, Pennsylvania. You find men who have something to lose, move in, drain them, and disappear. Tessa's mask shattered completely. You don't know what I've been through, she snapped. Anthony shook his head, pointing to the truck. I know what they have been through. Our children. Alicia watched the scene unfold with a sinking ache, especially when the children waved timidly from the truck window. Brandon's face twisted in horror as realization set in. You used me, he whispered. You used me to get the house, the money, everything. Tessa gave a bitter, humorless laugh. You think you were special, she spat. You were just another fool who believed a pretty lie. Then she ripped off Alicia's robe, hurled it toward Brandon, and stormed to her car. With screeching tires, she vanished down the street, leaving destruction in every direction. The roar of Tessa's car faded, but the shock she left behind only grew heavier. Anthony stood in the driveway, the weight of 12 years of betrayal resting on his shoulders. He exhaled slowly, then turned to Alicia with tired, apologetic eyes. I'm sorry for what she dragged you into, he said quietly. You didn't deserve any of this. Alicia shook her head gently. Neither did you. And neither did your children. Anthony managed a faint, grateful smile before glancing back at the truck, where 2 confused faces stared out as if trying to understand the chaos their mother had created. He looked at Brandon one last time, a man unraveling in real time, then walked back to the truck. The children gave Alicia a small wave, their innocence piercing through the tension that hung in the air. As Anthony drove away, the neighborhood fell into the kind of silence that follows a storm. A silence full of questions, judgments, and disbelief. Brandon stood alone in the driveway, surrounded by garbage bags stuffed with his clothes. His life crumbling at his feet. He didn't speak, didn't yell, didn't even look at Alicia. He simply stood there, hollow and defeated. And for the first time since the ordeal began, Alicia felt a shift inside her. Not triumph, not relief, but closure. Stephen cleared his throat gently, breaking the heavy quiet. Mr. Hale, he said, returning to the calm, precise tone of an attorney carrying out the final steps of justice. You have 72 hours to remove your belongings. Anything left afterward will become the property of Mrs. Grant. Brandon nodded numbly, still staring at the ground. Gone was the man who had dragged her suitcases across the lawn with pride and cruel satisfaction. In his place stood someone stripped bare, fearful, ashamed, and exposed. Alicia didn't approach him. She didn't need to. The truth had already done its work. When Brandon finally climbed into his car and backed out of the driveway, the neighbors, normally silent, reserved people, began to clap softly. Not mockingly, not cruelly, but in quiet solidarity with Alicia. Mrs. Willis stepped beside her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Your mother raised one strong woman, she said warmly. Alicia lowered her gaze, her chest tightening in bittersweet gratitude. She did, she whispered. She really did. As the last car disappeared down the street and the neighbors slowly dispersed, the house stood still, almost reverent. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a home again. A home finally free of deceit. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the house with a warmth Alicia hadn't felt in months. It was as if the walls themselves exhaled, releasing the last traces of betrayal that had settled inside them. She moved through each room slowly, touching familiar surfaces, noticing small things she had forgotten. Her mother's framed photographs, the blanket folded neatly in the hallway, the scent of vanilla that still clung gently to the air. Alicia brewed a cup of coffee and stood by the window overlooking the garden Ruth once adored. Dew sparkled on the petals. Birds hopped across the fence line. Peace, real, tangible peace. settled into her bones. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled her. It no longer dictated her future. She sat at the kitchen table, Ruth's letter resting on the wood beside her, and felt something she hadn't in a long time. Possibility. A future that wasn't shaped by Brandon's lies or Tessa's manipulation, but by her own hands, by her mother's final wish, and by the strength she had rediscovered. Alicia read Ruth's letter again, slowly this time, letting every word anchor itself in her heart. Toward the end of the letter, Ruth had written, "Use the money to build something good. Help other women like you, women who gave too much to men who gave too little." Alicia traced the sentence with her fingertip, feeling a spark of purpose ignite within her. She thought of the women she had met during her nursing shifts, women exhausted, heartbroken, trapped in situations they felt powerless to escape. She remembered the tears they shared in hospital hallways, the stories whispered between forechecks and chart updates. They deserved more. She deserved more. A vision began to form in her mind. A support circle for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. A place where stories could be shared, wounds could be acknowledged, and strength could be rebuilt from the ashes of heartbreak. She could almost hear her mother's voice. "Create something that lasts, my girl." Alicia closed her eyes and whispered, "I will, Mom. I promise." And for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt excitement, gentle, cautious, but real. The idea settled into Alicia's mind like a seed ready to grow. She grabbed a notebook from the drawer and began writing. Ideas, goals, resources, names of women she knew who might need support. She called it the second chapter circle, a place where women could begin again when life knocked them down without mercy. She imagined weekly meetings in her living room, coffee brewing, stories flowing freely. She imagined bringing in counselors, legal advisors, and financial planners to help women reclaim their independence. Her mother's $40,000 would fund the beginning, but Alicia planned to grow it into something much bigger, something transformative. She looked up at Ruth's framed letter on the wall. The sunlight hit the glass just right, making the edges glow like a blessing. Alicia smiled softly. "The house remembers loyalty," she whispered, words her mother used to say. "And so will I." She closed her notebook and exhaled slowly. The storm had ended. The truth had stood tall. And now, at last, the rebuilding could begin. The house stood quietly around her, steady, peaceful, and finally hers. Alicia didn't leave the house for the rest of the morning. She needed the stillness, the quiet space where her mother's voice seemed to linger in every corner. She cleaned slowly and intentionally, reclaiming her home one room at a time. She folded blankets, washed glasses Tessa had touched, and aired out the spaces that had felt polluted by deceit. Then she moved to her mother's old bedroom, now preserved like a memory, soft and untouched. Alicia ran her hand across the quilt Ruth had sewn years ago. "You protected me even while you were dying," she whispered. The truth broke her open in a gentle way, not like shattering glass, but like a deep exhale after holding her breath for too long. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears fall freely this time. Not because she was weak, but because she finally felt safe enough to cry. When the tears stopped, she rose with a new steadiness in her step. She was no longer a woman abandoned and humiliated in front of her neighbors. She was a woman rising. Later that afternoon, Stephen stopped by briefly to complete the last of the legal formalities. He walked through the house with a respectful quietness, as though he understood it wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary stitched together by loyalty and loss. He handed Alicia a folder with neatly arranged final documents. "Everything is now officially in your name," he said. "Brandon has no further claim." Alicia nodded gratefully. "Thank you for everything. You saved me more than you know." Stephen shook his head. "Your mother saved you. I merely carried out her wishes." She was meticulous, Alicia. She anticipated every move Brandon might make. Alicia swallowed hard. "She knew him better than I did." "She knew you," Stephen corrected gently. "She knew you'd try to forgive him. She knew you'd give too much." Alicia inhaled, steadying her emotions. Not anymore, she said. Stephen smiled softly. Good. That's what she wanted. For the first time in years, Alicia slept peacefully. No anxiety. No waiting for Brandon to come home angry. No fear of Tessa's ghost lingering in the corners of her life. Morning light warmed her face as she awoke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt since before Ruth became ill. She prepared herself a simple breakfast and walked onto the porch with her coffee. The street was quiet again, normal, almost comforting. Mrs. Willis waved from across the lawn. Good morning, dear. How do you feel today? Alicia took a slow breath. Like I can breathe again. Mrs. Willis nodded knowingly. Your mother would be proud. Alicia looked toward the sky for a moment, letting the gratitude settle. I hope so. She returned inside and placed her coffee beside her notebook labeled the second chapter circle. She had plans to make, real ones. Plans born not from tragedy, but from purpose. And today, finally, she had the strength to begin. Alicia started by calling women she trusted. Co-workers, friends, former patients' families. She reached out to anyone she knew who had survived emotional or financial betrayal. To her surprise, the response was immediate. Women were eager to talk, eager to be seen, eager for a safe space. One woman told Alicia, I've been waiting years for something like this. Another whispered, my husband drained our accounts and left. I never thought I'd recover. Their voices filled Alicia's heart with renewed determination. She created a schedule, drafted a mission statement, and outlined resources she wanted to provide. Legal guidance, financial literacy workshops, emotional counseling. She planned it all at her mother's kitchen table, where Ruth had once fought silently for Alicia's future. The house felt alive again, not with chaos but with hope. Alicia paused, her pen resting against the page. Mom, she whispered, I'm doing this because of you. In her mind, she could almost hear Ruth reply. Then do it well, my girl. For the first time in years, Alicia slept peacefully. No anxiety. No waiting for Brandon to come home angry. No fear of Tessa's ghost lingering in the corners of her life. Morning light warmed her face as she awoke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt since before Ruth became ill. She prepared herself a simple breakfast and walked onto the porch with her coffee. The street was quiet again, normal, almost comforting. Mrs. Willis waved from across the lawn. Good morning, dear. How do you feel today? Alicia took a slow breath. Like I can breathe again. Mrs. Willis nodded knowingly. Your mother would be proud. Alicia looked toward the sky for a moment, letting the gratitude settle. I hope so. She returned inside and placed her coffee beside her notebook labeled the second chapter circle. She had plans to make, real ones. Plans born not from tragedy, but from purpose. And today, finally, she had the strength to begin. Alicia started by calling women she trusted. Co-workers, friends, former patients' families. She reached out to anyone she knew who had survived emotional or financial betrayal. To her surprise, the response was immediate. Women were eager to talk, eager to be seen, eager for a safe space. One woman told Alicia, I've been waiting years for something like this. Another whispered, my husband drained our accounts and left. I never thought I'd recover. Their voices filled Alicia's heart with renewed determination. She created a schedule, drafted a mission statement, and outlined resources she wanted to provide. Legal guidance, financial literacy workshops, emotional counseling. She planned it all at her mother's kitchen table, where Ruth had once fought silently for Alicia's future. The house felt alive again, not with chaos but with hope. Alicia paused, her pen resting against the page. Mom, she whispered, I'm doing this because of you. In her mind, she could almost hear Ruth reply. Then do it well, my girl. Meanwhile, Brandon sat in a small rented motel room, staring at the ceiling in stunned silence. The collapse of his life came not from a single blow but from truth catching up to every lie he ever told. His business was failing, creditors were calling, and Tessa, the woman he thought would build a future with him, was exposed as a con artist with a husband and children she had abandoned. Every door he thought he controlled had slammed shut. He replayed the moment Stephen handed him the restraining order, the crowd watching, the shame burning through him. And Alicia, silent, strong, unmoved, had become the reflection he feared most. She never yelled, never cursed him, never begged. Her calm had destroyed him more deeply than anger ever could. Brandon pressed a shaking hand to his face. For the first time in years, he realized the truth. He had lost everything that mattered, and he had no one to blame but himself. Anthony, too, sat with his own thoughts that night. He watched his children sleep in the motel they now called temporary home. The betrayal he endured from Tessa was deep, but Alicia's kindness lingered in his mind. She had looked at his children with compassion, not judgment. He appreciated that more than he knew how to express. He whispered a quiet promise to them. No more chaos. I'll protect you better now. His words carried resolve, not bitterness. He folded the custody papers and placed them neatly on the nightstand. Tomorrow he would file them. Tomorrow he would begin again too. The destruction Tessa left behind wasn't the end. It was the beginning of clarity for them both. Back in her home, Alicia placed Ruth's framed letter on the mantel where sunlight hit it every morning. She lit the vanilla coffee candle her mother loved, letting the aroma fill the house with memory and warmth. She sat in her mother's old rocking chair, gently swaying, listening to the soft creaks that once lulled her to sleep as a child. She looked around at her reclaimed home, clean, bright, peaceful, and felt a sense of triumph that wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, eternal. Her mother's protection was woven into every brick. Alicia whispered into the stillness. I forgive myself for staying too long, for not seeing sooner. I forgive myself for loving the wrong man. A tear slipped down her cheek, not from pain but from release. The kind of release that marks the beginning of a new life. The next morning, Alicia stood at the front door, the same door Brandon once used to throw her out, and opened it wide. Sunlight poured in, bright and unfiltered, illuminating the home that was finally, undeniably hers. Women from the second chapter circle began to arrive for their next meeting, each carrying her own story, each stepping into Alicia's home with hope. As Alicia welcomed them in, she realized something profound. Her mother hadn't just saved her. Ruth had handed her a mission. Legacy. Path. Alicia's heart warmed with purpose. She placed Ruth's letter gently on the center table for every woman to see. This house, she said softly, remembers loyalty. And today, it becomes a place where broken hearts rise again. Laughter, conversation, and soft music filled the rooms that had once echoed with betrayal. The house stood tall, proud, and reborn. And so did Alicia Grant, no longer the woman thrown out onto the lawn, but the woman who stood again, stronger than ever, ready to build second chapters for everyone who walked through her door.